Twilight of an Empire. By Zhongwen and Boya. Chapter 15, Democratic Socialism and Social Fragmentation or Disintegration. Opening. Dear listeners, this is the final installment of our broadcast series. We began with the 300-year cycle of rise and fall, moved through the question of American exceptionalism, traversed the history of the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War II, and passed through the multiple layers of the New Moral Awakening, the MAGA movement, media fragmentation, judicial politicization, fiscal uncontrol, and the education crisis. Today, we arrive at the heaviest destination of this journey, the sharpening and radicalization of ideological conflict, and the threat of social disintegration in the United States. 1. From disagreement to abyss, the acceleration of polarization. Political disagreement in a democratic society is normal, even healthy. Disagreement means pluralism, means that different interests and values find expression in the public sphere. The design of democratic institutions is precisely intended to convert these disagreements into policy outputs that can be negotiated, compromised, and lived with. But there is a kind of polarization that democratic institutions struggle to absorb, when disagreement is no longer a matter of competing interests or policies, but becomes a perception that the other side's very existence is a threat, when my side's defeat means not just a policy shift, but the destruction of an entire civilization, when the other side is not just a political opponent, but a moral enemy, even, in the literal sense, an enemy. America today is approaching this tipping point. Pew Research Center surveys over the years show that the proportion of Americans who view the opposing party as a threat to the nation has surged from roughly 17 to 20% in the 1990s to over 70% today. This is not a mild divergence of policy preferences. It is the activation of existential threat perception, a psychological state that, historically, has been highly correlated with the onset of political violence. 2. The real trajectory of violence. The real threat of political violence in America is no longer merely a theoretical concern. In 2017, a supporter of Bernie Sanders opened fire on a Republican congressional baseball practice in Virginia, wounding several members of Congress. On January 6, 2021, thousands of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to block certification of the electoral votes, resulting in multiple deaths and hundreds of injuries. In 2022, a man attacked the husband of then-House Speaker Nancy Pelosi with a hammer. That same year, an attempt was made to attack the FBI's Ohio field office. In 2024, there were 2 assassination attempts against Trump himself. These incidents come from both ends of the political spectrum and target different political figures. They send a common signal: somewhere in America, political violence is moving from the margins toward the mainstream, transitioning from a shameful exception to a comprehensible option. Even more alarming are the shifts revealed in polling data. Studies show that the proportion of Americans who believe violence may be necessary to protect the American way of life has risen significantly in recent years, with sizable percentages on both sides holding this view. When violence is increasingly seen as a legitimate political tool, the occurrence of violent incidents becomes merely a matter of time. 3. The rise of democratic socialism, another fault line. On the other side of political polarization, democratic socialism is gaining unprecedented political space in America. Bernie Sanders, the elderly senator from Vermont, stunned the entire political establishment with the astonishing mobilizing power he demonstrated in the 2016 and 2020 Democratic primaries. His platform is quite radical by American political standards: Medicare for all, free college education, a substantial increase in the minimum wage, a wealth tax on the super-rich, and breaking up giant corporate monopolies. Sanders supporters are predominantly younger, millennials and Gen Z, burdened with massive student debt, facing unattainable housing prices, and seeing no future for themselves in the so-called booming economy. The rise of the Squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other progressive congresswomen, has further brought democratic socialist demands into Congress. The Green New Deal, housing as a human right, healthcare as a fundamental right, these ideas are redefining the boundaries of the American left. The tension between this trend and America's traditional free market ideology constitutes another deepening fault line. 4. 5 dimensions of social disintegration. When we speak of the threat of social disintegration in America, we are referring to 5 interrelated phenomena that are accelerating simultaneously. First, the comprehensive collapse of social trust. American trust in nearly all major institutions, the federal government, Congress, the media, the Supreme Court, big business, universities, has fallen to historic lows. Without trust, there is no cooperation. Without cooperation, society cannot effectively solve collective problems. Second, the hollowing out of community life. Political scientist Robert Putnam, in his book Bowling Alone, as early as 2000, documented the sustained decline of American social capital. The proportion of Americans participating in voluntary organizations, community activities, and religious groups has been falling for decades. Without substantive community ties, people become more isolated and more susceptible to radicalizing information. Third, the fragmentation of family structure. The proportion of single-parent families continues to rise. The fertility rate has fallen below replacement level. Men, especially those at the bottom, face increasing difficulty in social integration. These trends are eroding the basic unit of society. Fourth, a mental health crisis. Rates of depression, anxiety, and loneliness in America have reached historic highs in recent years. Among the 18 to 25 age group, loneliness is particularly pronounced. A society in the throes of a mental health crisis will exhibit more irrational and emotional political behavior. Fifth, the loss of confidence in a shared future. When more and more Americans believe the country is heading in the wrong direction, and feel despair about the possibility of change, political apathy and radicalization rise together. The former leads to the atrophy of democratic participation, the latter fuels the expansion of extremist movements. 5. The echo of history. Can a republic save itself? In our first episode, we said, the 300-year cycle is not an iron law, it is a mirror. Throughout history, there have been civilizations that, even on a seemingly inevitable trajectory of decline, have found the capacity for self-renewal. The Roman Republic could not save itself, but its civilizational legacy nourished the entire Western world for 1500 years. The Ming dynasty did not continue, but Chinese civilization was transmitted and transformed under the Qing. The British Empire declined, but its institutional legacies, common law, parliamentary democracy, press freedom, remain among humanity's most precious political inheritances. What America faces is a real historical choice. Will it drift toward a disintegrative collapse amid internal fragmentation, or will it find a new path to integration under the pressure of crisis? America has twice before found a way out of seemingly insoluble crises. 1. After the North-South divide, it reconstructed itself through the Civil War. 2. After the Great Depression, it led the world through World War II, thus launching 2 new cycles. Now, mired deep in the chaos of a 4th cycle, can it remain peaceful? That choice is still possible today. But the window of time may not be wide. Series conclusion. Dear listeners, over 15 broadcasts, we have traveled a long historical journey. From the macro patterns of the 300-year cycle, to America's specific political fractures, from the genius and flaws of the founding generation, to the smoke of today's ideological warfare, from Lincoln's Civil War, to Roosevelt's wheelchair, from the decline of mainstream media, to the chaos of social media, from fiscal uncontrol, to educational imbalance, to social disintegration. All of this tells one story. When a great republic approaches a critical historical juncture, how will its citizens choose? History's answer is never written by a leader alone. It is written collectively by the daily choices of millions of ordinary people, voting or abstaining, listening or closing off, anger or reflection, division or reconciliation. Sima Guang said, "By examining the past, we gain the means to govern the present." These 15 broadcasts are our modest offering to that mirror of history. Thank you for listening and for your company along the way.